welcome to The Other Side, Mississippi Today's political podcast. I'm Jeff Pender, joined here today with my colleagues, Taylor Vance. Taylor, hello.
Hey, Jeff.
And Michael Goldberg.
Hey, Jeff.
These two guys are fresh back from a trip to our nation's capital. Spent a week there, and this week had quite a few stories, and I believe we have some more coming.
We feel very enlightened now that we have gotten to spend some time around our fine scholars in Congress debating the urgent issues of the day and been around the national media. So our IQ points have gone up about 20.
Enlightened is one way to put it. We feel something. I'm not sure if it's enlightened. But
no, I think this was really good. Something Mississippi Today has done from time to time. Travel to D.C., talk with our delegation, and as I said, you guys came back with quite a few stories and probably some insight for down the road. But Taylor, what stands out? Among other things, you met with our senior Senator Roger Wicker, correct?
We did, and I would argue that Senator Wicker is probably the most powerful, prominent, kind of Republican given his chairmanship. He is chairman of Armed Services Committee in the Senate, which has jurisdiction over the military and the Defense Department. And yes, he was very gracious, gave us about 15 minutes to interview him. And I think funny enough, Michael, I guess we can talk about this. It wasn't per se off the record, but something that stuck out to me was Senator Wicker was kind of haggling and doing a little bit of business while we were interviewing him. During the interview, someone, I'm not sure what the particular position was, but
a senior Democratic staffer, I believe, on the Armed Services Committee.
He started talking about some things that may or may not be in the defense spending bill. So I thought that was
classified. I mean, you guys don't need to be leaking any.
Do not believe we needed a security clearance to talk about it, but yeah, I think it really showed the extent to which this wheeling and dealing in Washington happens in sort of the hallways, and I think Roger Wicker was eager to display his bipartisan streak in front of us, and it was certainly left an impression as far as sort of the ongoing dialogue that is Washington D.C. politics.
One thing noteworthy, Taylor, you had a story on this. Senator Wicker sort of let you guys break some news that a big report is completed and about to be
released soon in some capacity. The Inspector General report, or kind of the watchdog report, and Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth's use of Signal, the Signal app, when a couple of months ago, it was reported that he was using Signal to communicate some military plans in Yemen with members of the president's cabinet and national security team, and accidentally invited a prominent reporter to the chat.
This is something Senator Wicker has wanted to.
Yes, he signed on to a letter with the top Democrat on the committee, asking the Inspector General to investigate whether classified material was shared on the chat. But anyway, he did not go into detail, and he I don't think was he did not say anything negative about the secretary. Didn't say what would be in the report. He just said that it is his understanding that it's complete and it's under review, and that the Armed Services Committee should be in possession of it soon.
Sure.
I keep wishing, Jeff, someone would invite me to some type of chat, but it hasn't happened yet. I keep wishing someone would get me and J.D. Vance mixed up, but that hasn't happened yet.
That hasn't happened yet, sure. Okay, one of the stories we've already had, and as I said, I think we have some more in the hopper, but one story we had last week, talking about the National Guard being mobilized in some U.S. cities, and one person you talked with is our U.S. Representative Kelly, himself a retired high-ranking military major general and longtime guardsman. In particular, what was his take on this state of affairs?
Yeah, so we spoke to Representative Kelly and Representative Mike Ezell, who's a former sheriff, about this effort to send the National Guard into the nation's capital. They are there, of course, have been for some time now, and they were both very supportive of this measure, both in terms of sort of a preventive, sort of fighting crime, more of a sort of police presence on the street perspective. They both came out in favor of it. As far as Jackson is concerned, obviously there's been talk of sending National Guard troops here, and I think that they were less strident on that front. They didn't necessarily come out in favor of it, but didn't rule out the prospect of supporting it either.
Yeah.
This has been obviously a controversial flashpoint, and from both sides of the aisle, federalized troops in U.S. cities, that is controversial from people from, again, both sides of the aisle. And I believe you talked with our lone Democratic member of the delegation. What was his take on that?
He is opposed to it. He, has said in statements that he was also the co-chairman or chairman of the January 6th committee investigating that insurrection at the Capitol, and he kind of has said some barbed statement saying, the time for the president to deploy the National Guard was January 6th, not now in D.C., and has, along with many other Democrats, said that he thinks that the president should be and Congress should be doing more to give more long-term resources to cities to combat crime than sending in the National Guard just for a period of time.
I noted Congressman Kelly, some comments he made match my understanding that the National Guard, they are not law enforcement. They are not police officers.
Right. And we didn't get into really the specifics, but I think his main point was that the National Guard does have sufficient training on what they can and cannot do. They are not law enforcement. They're not supposed to be investigating crimes. They are there really in a supporting capacity to support, law enforcement officers on the ground and handle logistics. And he sort of compared it to the training that like military police officers have. And believes that they know what they can do and what they can't do. And
it's also been framed as sort of a bandwidth issue. So by, sending in the National Guard, the idea is that you're freeing up local law enforcement to focus on more serious investigations rather than some lower level law enforcement tasks that the National Guard is reportedly focusing on now.
Yeah.
That is one way it's been framed.
Sure.
Yes.
It's been framed in some other ways. We live in interesting times.
Yeah. But as you said, right now they've been deployed to Memphis. There's been some speculation about whether they will go to St. Louis, Chicago, New Orleans, and Jackson, but it seems that even from Governor Reeves has kind of sort of very, very politely and delicately pushed back on that. And said
his take has been, look, we created essentially a special state police force for Jackson.
For Jackson and the CCID court and other things. And
of course, worth noting, while we were in Washington, I believe White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt listed Jackson by name as an example of a Democratic-led city where, from her perspective, crime is out of control. A Democratic-led city in a red state. And I think you've seen the administration, they initially had plans to send the National Guard into Chicago, and they've said that their strategy going forward is probably more to focus on red states where the governors would be more supportive, regardless of local elected officials.
Again, we live in interesting times. Another major issue been going on for a while and was heating up again while you were there were the Epstein files.
Yeah.
I believe you talked with our delegation about that. How did that shake out, that conversation?
As you could probably guess, most of the Republicans kind of said, generally we support transparency and want people to be held accountable and prosecuted if they committed a crime in connection with this, but didn't really see much of a need to kind of push the Department of Justice to release the files, haven't really signed on to legislation or attempts to push the Department of Justice to do it, and kind of believe it's a political distraction, and people are Democrats and activists are kind of just using it to get at Donald Trump,
and
basically.
Beyond talk, in the Senate, we had a recent vote.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Where did our two senators come down on that?
They opposed it. And I believe it was on the defense spending measure.
Yes. So Chuck Schumer, the Democratic leader, used a procedural move to, I believe, attach an amendment that would have called for the release of the Epstein files. It was a 51-49 vote. Both of Mississippi's senators voted against the measure. The only two Republicans to vote in favor were Josh Hawley of Missouri and Rand Paul of Kentucky. So that effort failed in the Senate.
Yeah.
Also think to get into the sort of particulars, because it's sort of, I think, helpful to understand how these members are going home to their districts and framing their opposition, or not opposition, but their hesitancy to call for the release of the Epstein files. Mike Ezell said that he sort of expected one way or another the files would become public at some point due to the sort of serious nature of the contents, but he declined to actually come out in favor of calling for the Justice Department to release the files. And Representative Kelly sort of said that if Donald Trump was included and was sort of implicated in a serious way, that would have happened already due to, the number of investigations that have been levied.
And you mentioned our House delegation. I guess it would also be sort of important to note that there is, I don't want people's eyes to get glazed over when they listen to this, but there's a petition going around in the House to force a House vote on this issue. And I think Congressman Thompson is the only Mississippi member who has signed on to that to force a vote on it.
Yes, and Representative Michael Guest, he was we did not have a sit down with him. He has some obligations on the Appropriations Committee.
We did ask him about that recently, though. Right?
We did ask at the Neshoba County Fair in July, and he came out in favor, I think, in a stronger manner.
Sort of generally supportive.
Again, it's a political distraction, he said, and we needed to sort of release it so we can see what's in it and move on, was I believe, his thinking at that period of time, at least.
Yeah.
All right. One issue, Michael, I think you have some things in the works, but you did talk with Representative Ezell from South Mississippi and the coast a little bit about what's going on with FEMA issues, disaster recovery mitigation. What was that like? How did that conversation go?
Yeah, so the conversation arose in the context of, obviously the 20th anniversary of Katrina just passed, and natural disasters on the coast are always an issue that's top of mind. And Representative Ezell is working on a bill at the moment that would essentially leave FEMA on the hook for paying legal fees that are filed in response to claims that are taken against cities and towns. So if residents have trouble obtaining sort of the funds, the disaster recovery funds that they're owed by FEMA in a timely manner. And it was interesting, Representative Ezell said that there are still, the city of Biloxi, I believe, is still owed money from Hurricane Katrina 20 years ago. So apparently rolling out these funds can be a quite lengthy process. And in that intermediary period, you have individuals filing claims against cities and towns. And that can be a quite costly process. So The representative is working on a bill right now that would essentially force FEMA to pay some of those legal fees so that city and towns are not left on the hook. So that should be coming in the near future. We'll, of course, be reporting on that when he drops that bill. And yeah, I think there is, widespread concern that the administration more broadly has sort of cut funding for FEMA and undermined it. So it'll be interesting to see what policies emerge in response to that effort.
Yeah, we recently had an episode focused more on mitigation efforts too. And
right.
As I understand, Congressman Ezell and others are looking at those issues as well.
Yeah, sort of broader mitigation issues, coastal preservation. I think there's efforts to partner with other states as well. He is working with Senator John Kennedy of Louisiana. Anytime there's a partnership between Louisiana and Mississippi, it's worth taking note. I think it's more of like a regional effort from his perspective. So yeah, we'll be tracking that going forward.
Yeah, I would point out that Congressman Thompson, not surprisingly, had a little bit of a different take and was a little more alarmist over the cuts to FEMA, which is important to note that he is the ranking member, the top Democrat on the Homeland Security Committee, which has jurisdiction over FEMA. And there's been some reporting on this issue that it is taking a much longer time for FEMA and the administration to approve disaster relief requests from the governors in the state.
We recently had a pretty extensive report on that, correct?
Yes. And I asked him why that is, if he knew why it was, and he didn't really have a substantive answer. I mean, he said, I think that the administration just doesn't like FEMA. And he was very critical of the administration and said, since the new administration took office, there has not been anyone from FEMA who has come to testify before his committee. Now, I believe the Homeland Security Secretary, Kristi Noem, may have appeared before the committee, but there has not been anyone really at FEMA and FEMA leadership come to testify. And he said that's very unusual. But Congressman Kelly, said that while he understands that there may be some concerns and there may be some other congressional districts may have had an issue, that in Northeast Mississippi, FEMA has been very responsive to any issues that he has had up there.
Yeah, and I believe our report on this noted that this issue of the sort of lengthy time frame has dated back years, and that it can be attributed, at least in part, to the federal government sort of trying to make sure that if there are elements that can be funded at the local level rather than footing the bill at the federal level, they're going to take more time to do that.
Yeah, and one thing people need to keep in mind, there are two different types of responses. There's the immediate, the immediate disaster response, and that's where, there's all this talk of the states taking more responsibility. Maybe there being some block grant program, but one thing we've seen in the past with Katrina, with other major disasters, no state has the ability or the checkbook that the federal government has.
Right.
To me, that's going to be the difficult trick, is coming up with a way where help on a large scale can be given out quickly to people who need ice.
And there would be the question of, do we even have... I mean, the money is also an issue. Do we have the manpower?
Exactly. If
the logistics.
That's one thing I've heard in this debate. Again, especially the initial, immediate, rapid response of rescuing people, of getting them water, getting them ice. For a state to gear up to do that and have such a force of people and bankroll sitting there day in and day out waiting on a disaster, does that make sense when you could have the federal setup now is able to deploy that? So that's hard to see how the states are going to be able to take that over. It really is.
Right.
I know that's being discussed and looked at. That'll be interesting. That's a huge hurdle to try and overcome.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, you guys ready to go back to D.C.? You want to be stationed there instead of
that was really the motive for this trip. We are making a play to be the first two reporters at Mississippi Today's D.C. bureau.
Look, I thought the state legislature is bad enough; it'll make you go insane. I think if you stay in Congress, it's even worse. No, but it was a nice trip, and our delegation was very welcoming, and for the most part, everyone sat down.
Some small
and
exceptions.
Agreed to interviews, and they were gracious with their time, and I hope that can continue.
Sure. One thing, Michael, we failed to mention is when we were talking about the National Guard.
Yes.
You this week actually covered an event and are kind of updating what's becoming a crowded field for the 2026 Senate race in Mississippi. Challengers to incumbent Cindy Hyde-Smith. One of those challengers you talked with this week, and she was using the National Guard as an issue, correct?
Yeah. So Sarah Adlaka. I knew I was going to butcher her last name, so my apologies if she's listening. But she held a press conference this week in which she called for President Trump to send the National Guard to Jackson. As we mentioned, he sent them to Memphis already. She also sent him a private letter asking for him to do that. She is running in the Republican primary against Cindy Hyde-Smith. Also, Andrew Scott Smith is another candidate on that side. And yeah, I mean, as far as the National Guard is concerned, it definitely seems to be, an issue that she is potentially jumping on at the moment to try to sort of differentiate herself from the field and capture the attention of primary voters. Not to suggest she doesn't have an earnest sort of desire to push that approach as a way to curb crime in Jackson. She is again from Ocean Springs, or she lives in Ocean Springs, so she's not a local Jackson resident. But yeah, we have sort of the field is taking shape on the Democratic side. Of course, Scott Colomb has announced his candidacy. Priscilla Williams-Till, a civil rights activist and a distant family member of Emmett Till, has announced her candidacy as well. So we'll be covering the early stages of that race as well.
Becoming a crowded field,
sure
definitely.
Potentially a more expensive race as well. I know we're talking to some folks both on the GOP and Democratic side in Washington who have both indicated they plan to spend money on this race. So
Right. Okay, well, guys, glad you're back in the Magnolia State, and look forward
where we belong
to more reports forthcoming from your DC trip.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thanks.